Hello everybody and welcome back to the Fortress of Solitude. Let's take a trip back to the Donnerverse in Superman 78 of the Metal Curtain issue 3 by Robert Venditti and Gavin Guidry. Venditti expands the book's cast and story of this issue as Superman, defeated by Metallo at the end of the last issue, is found by the US Marines, who are out looking for their downed spy plane. This brings Superman into confrontation with General Sam Lane, making his first Donnerverse appearance. Venditti is quick to assure us this won't be like the usual Sam Lane we get to see throughout the comics. This is actually more like Dylan Walsh's Sam Lane from Superman and Lois. He is stern and a little distrustful towards Superman, but sees his usefulness and even trusts his daughter's opinion on the hero, something past iterations never really do, and he's usually pretty gung-ho at taking Superman down. Their first meeting was also a great look at Clark meeting Lois's parents for the first time, and they already have this pre-established idea of him, so he's got to kind of win Sam over a little bit, and obviously he'll end up doing that by helping defeat Metallo. We touch back in on Metallo this issue as well and learn that Captain Nikolai, while making great use of the new Kryptonite heart and armor, seems to be losing his mind a little bit, angered that he couldn't just outright kill Superman. His superior reminds him that this is all about optics and people need to see Superman die, something Nikolai doesn't like at all. If you look at anything within the history of the Cold War, you'll see that the Soviets were pretty obsessed with optics. The Americans were as well, but they more so than anyone else. Everything had to look perfect from the outside and all is well within the Soviet Union. And you just have to look at things like the whole Chernobyl incident. If you ever saw that brilliant HBO series, that really covered it really well, where they acted like nothing was wrong, like nothing could possibly go wrong. And that's kind of like what's happening here, where they need the world to see that it was the Russians who defeated the Superman, and they can't have Superman just die in a snowy ditch in Antarctica. You know, that's not how they would want to do things. So I quite like that Venditti is bringing that to these characters, and it's also having an adverse effect on Nikolai, who just wants to use this new power he's gotten to kill Superman and to end this American threat to the Russians. And I'm intrigued to see how that's going to go with him, since it seems to be playing on his mind a little bit and making him a little bit crazy that he can't use that power. And we've seen before in the past, Metallos often go crazy thanks to the power of the kryptonite, like it starts infecting their mind and warping how they view the world and everything. So I'm intrigued to see what Venditti will do with this character throughout this series. Clark, meanwhile, isn't taking his attack well, reliving the incident over and over again in his head, and it seems to also be affecting him physically as well, like he still has lingering kryptonite poisoning, something which we haven't really seen in the films, at least the first Donnerverse film, which is canon to this. The other ones aren't canon, so maybe this could be Venditti bringing in something like maybe synthetic kryptonite, and maybe it's having an adverse effect on the hero. But I also like the idea that he is being presented with an enemy who could have outrightly killed him, and it's kind of scaring him, since that's nothing he's really come across before. There's been times where he's thought he's going to die, but here he actually like faced it right up close and it's having an effect on him, and I think that's kind of interesting, and hopefully Venditti plays with that a little bit more in the coming issues, that it starts affecting him when he's out saving people, like he starts seeing flashes of Metallo killing him and it makes him miss a save or something. It could be very interesting. Gavin Guidry's art returns to a more tight character-focused view as we explore the aftermath of Superman's battle with Metallo. It's all pretty straightforward stuff this issue. We get a lot more of the jet pilot, who is most likely Hal Jordan. Again, they don't name him, and I feel like that's Venditti just kind of playing with us a little bit, where he gives us all of the clues that it is Hal Jordan but doesn't outrightly name it. We also get to see a US Marine who is most likely John Stewart, being that John Stewart was a Marine in the DC Comics before he was the Green Lantern, and again Venditti wrote him and Hal quite extensively, so I'd like that. That's just a neat visual Easter egg on behalf of Gavin here. We also get introduced, of course, to Sam Lane this issue. Gavin has clearly modeled him after Lee Marvin, who totally would have played Sam back in the 70s and early 80s before his death, as he's got that real military general look about him. Clark's PTSD moment with the kryptonite was laid out really well, and we had great close-ups. It was all done in like close-ups of Clark's face in anguish, and it gave the whole moment a claustrophobic, uncomfortable feel, which is exactly what Clark was going through. Clark has to gird himself against these PTSD attacks as he and Lois get thrown on the spy plane story by the Daily Planet, and it leads to a really surprising turn in the story as Lois outright lies to Perry about Superman being her source and detailing what he told her about Metallo in the battle. On top of that, she is also seemingly working with someone outside of the Daily Planet, and by the way the pages and panels are arranged, it's heavily implied to be Lex Luthor, who does appear in the final page, and he did indeed sell the Russians that armor we saw in the first issue, Came Metallo, although they apparently lied to him about its use, now putting him at odds with the Russians, as well as the US government, as Lois's story with her source gets published and outright accuses the Russians on the attack, which will no doubt stoke some pretty bad fires that Superman will have to come in and put out. Robert Vendetti's newest Superman adventure doles out a nice amount of plot progression and explores the villains pretty thoroughly, tapping into some Cold War era sentiments for the character development on their part, and it culminates in an interesting direction for the series and one I didn't really expect to see, especially coming from certain characters like Lois Lane. I'm going to give this issue a 9 out of 10. Definitely check out this series if you haven't, and if you haven't checked out the previous series just titled Superman 78, do yourself a favor and check that one out as well.